Hey friend, welcome to Healthy with Heather Brown. If you don't know where to start with balancing being healthy and loving the life you already have, I got you, friend. And yes, of course, we're still going to enjoy some Chick-fil-A. I'm here to come alongside you and encourage you to fall more in love with your creator, your spouse, your kids, and your own health journey. We'll talk about how to let your good things grow until they become daily habits, with the occasional dad joke and point of view from my Yankee hubby, Eric. Don't stress. Let's hop on this Hot Mess Express together. So join me, Heather Brown, as we unpack what it looks like to live a life well loved. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Healthy with Heather Brown. I know I said this every week, but I truly am so excited to have our guest on today. Her name is Ashley Stock. She is also known in the Instagram and blogging world as Little Miss Mama. I think that I have been following her now. Oh my gosh. I mean, we connected back in the beginning of my dinosaur days of blogging, probably 10 years ago. I've been following her now. And so I am just beyond thrilled to lean into the wisdom that she's going to share with you guys. She shares what it looks like to walk through grief and pain so poignantly and also so raw in her journey. So I don't want to, give too much of a spoiler. I want her to be able to introduce herself and tell you her story. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Ashley.
Yay, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. Ashley, I'm trying to remember. I'm wondering if I have ever met you before at a blogging conference or if we just connected on Instagram. I cannot remember how we met.
I am so terrible at this. And we've all changed so much over the years.
Right.
That there's so many people that I've met. We don't realize we've been hanging out again for months. And we're like, wait, we've met before.
Right.
So we probably have. Maybe we have.
Maybe. There's no telling. But Ashley's one of those accounts where I think in the beginning of my blogging journey, probably 11, 12 years ago, because how long have you been blogging now?
Well, the only way I can ever remember is that I started after my first son was born and he's 13. So 13 years.
So yeah, there you go. So I know that I stumbled across you somehow. And then I literally remember reading posts about how you met your husband and all these sweet things. And then obviously now she has 2 boys. I have 2 boys. There's been a lot of life that's happened. So will you kind of just share with everybody a little bit about your story, who you are, your mission in motherhood, just so they can get to know you and what you've walked through so far?
Oh my goodness, such a loaded question, right?
Always.
Oh boy. And it's always where to begin, how much to share. But me in a nutshell is that born and raised in Southern California. And when I got pregnant with my first son, I was working full-time in marketing and advertising, but was put on bed rest and had to quit my job. And after he was born, I decided not to go back to work and just really lean into motherhood, which was the right decision for me. And I was incredibly grateful to have that opportunity. But at the same time, I definitely lost myself a bit and was having a lot of struggles with the stress of motherhood. And that was when I discovered a long time ago, the world of blogging. I mean, blogs have been around since, the beginning of the internet, but this was really the early stages of mommy blogging and the industry really coming into its own. And I discovered it mostly as a community to connect and to feel less alone and to get advice and to find other women who were sharing, these feelings in my heart that I didn't quite feel comfortable sharing out loud yet. I remember every day waking up and just thinking to myself, I'm not really good at this. I am not good at being a mom, and I'm so scared to say that out loud, and being really hard on myself. And then discovering this community online and realizing, oh, it's really normal to feel like you are messing up every single day. And it's not just you. And this is a learning curve, and really just finding myself at home in that community. And before I knew it, I had started my own blog where I was sharing my own journey of motherhood. And that has evolved over the years. I've paused as I've had to, focus on my family. I've gone full steam ahead. I've built a business out of it. I have, turned it into so many different more things. I've failed at a million things. I've found success in a lot of things. And I'm still finding myself through this community. I mean, there was one day where we woke up and it felt like suddenly there was this thing called Instagram and it had consumed all of our blogs. And now we were sharing our stories over on Instagram, and now there's TikTok, and it's, I've never felt older.
Agree. Same.
I can tell you that. For me to be old in this industry, I wake up every day and just think, this is crazy. I'm like a dinosaur here, and it's been an honor to watch it transform and kind of be a part of that. But mostly what I have been about is I try to do my best to, honor my family and their personal journey, but also share our story very openly and very honestly. I want to be authentic, but it's also really important to me. I don't try to sugarcoat everything, but I do like to find the silver lining. I do like to find the light in the darkness and the purpose in the pain. And so a large part of me navigating, our own family's obstacles has been, how do I find the light in this? How do I find the purpose in this? Because I firmly believe that that's the entire point.
Amen.
And at least for me, it has to be, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to wake up every day and face the challenges that we've been dealt. And to kind of dive into that a little bit more for anyone who doesn't know, my personal story is I have 2 sons and a daughter. My oldest he's 13 now, Wesley. And then I have a 10-year-old son, Sawyer. And then our 3-year-old daughter, Stevie, passed away in the middle of the pandemic from a brain tumor that we discovered very unexpectedly right in the height of lockdown. And from the moment she was diagnosed to the moment she passed away, it was only about 6 weeks. And when we realized that the brain tumor that she was diagnosed with was something that I had never heard of, it's called DIPG, and there's a 0% survival rate. I didn't even know that that was something that existed. I didn't even know, I remember finding out that she had the tumor and thinking, before we knew any more about it, thinking, okay, well, we'll have surgery. We're going to be cancer parents. We're going to have chemotherapy and radiation, and we're going to shave her head, and we're going to do this, and we got this, and we're going to live in hospitals, and we're strong, and we can do this. And then I remember, a team of doctors sitting me down and saying, there isn't a treatment. There are things we can do that may prolong her life by a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. She'll be incredibly uncomfortable. But this is one of the few cancers and tumors that we can't touch, we can't operate on, and we haven't had success in finding any real successful treatment for. And I remember just thinking, well, that's not possible. Maybe you're going to tell me there's a 1% chance or a 5% chance. I've heard of that, but what? What do you mean? And that was really hard to sink in. And when it finally did, we were faced with the other difficult decision of, do we stay here at Children's Hospital, or do we bring her home to be with her brothers,
right,
to be with her puppies, to be able to be with her family in these final days? And that was the decision we ultimately made, was to bring her home. So we were only in the hospital for a week because it was in the middle of the pandemic and her family wouldn't be able to come see her. I was there with her by myself. My husband even couldn't come. We would have to switch off. So we brought her home and we made the most of those final weeks together. And we had her 3rd birthday, and we had her Make-A-Wish farm backyard party in the height of the pandemic when people weren't allowed to see each other. So, these magical fairies showed up in our backyard and set up balloons and animals, and then they left. And we went into our backyard as a family with masks and helped to celebrate and put a smile on our face so that she could have, and her brothers could have, some really, positive final memories. And
yes,
after she passed away in our home, it has been a whirlwind in a journey of grief that is ongoing. And all I can say is one day at a time, because every day has been different. And I do share about that journey pretty openly online, because if there's anything I've learned, it's that just as a people are not really experienced or taught the language of grief. And what I mean by that is we struggle to talk to each other about our own grief, about the other person's grief. There's a lot of discomfort we have in talking to people about their grief. People often, air quotes, say the wrong thing, or we're so afraid we're going to say the wrong thing, or we're so offended by something somebody says. And I think that all of this comes from, for so long, we were taught not to talk about it.
Right.
And the disservice that is done to each of us, because grief is universal and it's something that we are without a doubt going to experience in this life. And I think it has this incredible power to unify and to connect us. And instead, we have just not really talked about it for long enough. So I speak about the tough days. I speak about the eye-opening days. I speak about the ongoing truth and brutality of, what we live with and what others are living with and what that looks like for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Ashley, thank you for willing to come on and share your story and share your grief, because that's not an easy road. And I was telling Ashley right before we started recording that I just listened to her on another podcast sharing a little bit about just her grief journey and what that's looked like. And I thought it was really interesting how you talked about that you felt bad for women or men that have had to walk through grief and hospital sickness during the pandemic. On that podcast, you talked about how you feel like people will be like, okay, I feel so bad for you. Like, I can't imagine going through that. That is so unbelievably hard. And you were talking about, well, actually, what's really cool is before this new grief with Stevie, I had a massive grief about something else in my life. And even though it's harder now, but like, I didn't know any harder then. And so it's like the grief that you feel about whatever it is, that almost allows you to speak to their hurt and what they're in right then,
Yes. And I think one of our biggest barriers to connecting over our grief is we think that if we haven't felt a grief as, again, air quotes, big as somebody else's, then we haven't earned the right to support them in their grief, or we can't possibly relate, or I can't imagine what you're going through, is sort of the story and the lie that we tell ourselves. And while all of our circumstances are different, we have all experienced loss in some capacity. And loss isn't just the loss or the passing of a loved one. We grieve a lot of things. And again, when I was new to parenthood and I thought I was failing and we were navigating, raising a child with a lot of sensory issues that were new to us, and we were navigating what that looked like. And I remember waking up with my husband one day and we had to realize and give ourselves permission that we needed to grieve the life we had imagined for ourselves. And that was okay. And that just because we were feeling these negative emotions about our life didn't mean that we didn't see the blessings. It didn't mean that we weren't grateful for the children we had been given and didn't think that they were perfect exactly as they were. But in our minds, it was going to be really easy for us to pick up and travel with our family, or at least go out to eat and not have kiddo meltdowns, or not have to have accommodations in a classroom setting for our child, or not have to go to therapy with our kids. That wasn't part of the journey we envisioned, but it became our journey. And there were so many beautiful lessons we learned out of the life that we were given, but we also had to give ourselves permission to grieve the life we imagined and grieve the type of parents or daily life that we thought we were going to have. And in a lot of ways, that prepared us for the grief that we were going to be faced with when we received the news about Stevie. And all of us has that. All of us has something that we are grieving, or something that we have lost, or something that didn't go according to plan, or a heartbreak, or a disappointment, or a trauma that has happened to us. And we have all experienced pain. And when you tell yourself, I can't imagine what that person is going through, I always tell you, just try to imagine what they're going through by calling upon your own grief, by calling upon your own loss, your own pain. And we're not asking you to compare. We're not asking you to measure yours against theirs. We're just asking you to draw upon that so that you can imagine what they're going through. Because when you put yourself in their shoes and you do try to imagine, is when you are going to feel the most comfortable around them and they're going to feel the most comfortable around you. And that is the beginning of learning the language of grief.
That is so good. And one thing that you were talking about with the 2020 stuff too, and it made me think about it, because you were like, even if you haven't experienced the loss of maybe even like a parent or a grandparent, or, God forbid, like you, a child, or I have been shocked with how many people and women in counseling that have talked to me about, people don't realize that they are actually grieving their life pre-2020, because so many of us had like such a different lifestyle, or your job was different, or you went to an office, or like the way that you were able to interact with your coworkers, your people, whatever it was, changed. And so almost even like we all in this day and age right now actually have this common thing that we all went through. It obviously affected all of us differently, But how neat that the way that you're talking, it's like we can almost use that as a tool in our tool belt to help us with how to empathize with others and their grief and learn to speak it when we don't normally practice that, you know?
You know, one of the most popular questions I hear is, how do you do it all? Or, can I pick your brain? And I always laugh because my knee-jerk reaction is, oh girl, I don't do it all. And now I have a way to let you pick my brain about my business. I have an incredible team of women helping me manage my crazy behind the scenes and keeping My Life Well Loved and this podcast running smoothly. Because Lord knows I'd be a hot mess express trying to do it all myself. This year, I launched a course where I finally do a deep dive and share all the raw details about how I built my business and team to where it is today. My COO, Alyssa, and I recorded over 2 hours of video into 9 lessons to create a course that reviewers are saying is unlike anything else out there. Hey, their words, not mine. But hold on, the videos aren't all. I'm going to read you my list of what it includes so I don't forget any of it. There's a 28-page workbook with questions to move you from stuck as a solopreneur to thriving as a team, or even just hiring your first assistant, with smart goals and steps to guide you from point A to point B efficiently. A behind-the-scenes look at our application, hiring process, and critical onboarding process, my cannot-miss first step in hiring a new employee, and how to cultivate a team buy-in. There's a deep dive on my team's inner workings, our operating systems, favorite apps, and index full of time-saving tools we use to keep our team running smoothly. If you're ready to take your business, side hustle, or network marketing lifestyle to the next level and grow a team, I'm your girl. Head to www.mylifewellloved.com/team to grab yours today.
Couldn't agree more. And it's something that I'm starting to see a lot of, at least in my own life, which tells me that I'm probably not alone, is that the lesson I'm learning now is grace in grief, and grace for myself and grace for others. And it's been 2 years now, and it still feels like it was yesterday. And something that I haven't shared publicly yet at all, because I'm still, in the thick of it myself and working through, is that I recently thought that I was going through a bunch of medical testing after a bunch of symptoms I was experiencing that were pretty scary.
Wow.
And all of my test results came back that I'm as healthy as can be, which is great news. And I remember sitting down with my neurologist, and she's like, all of these symptoms that you're experiencing are incredibly real and incredibly painful, and they're really happening to you, but you're physically very healthy. What I'm looking at is PTSD. And you're experiencing
Oh, right. Oh my gosh.
physical symptoms of PTSD. And the worst of it is not over for you. That, everyone says time heals all wounds. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And I'm speaking on this a lot lately, but also it really just changes them. And I was beating myself up for a while of really denying a lot of the feelings of grief that I was experiencing as, well, that can't be what you're feeling because it's been 2 years. And of course you're going to be sad forever, but you can't possibly feel worse today or more depressed today, 2 years later, than you did right after. Certainly these aren't real emotions. Something else must be going on. And just the lies we tell ourselves and not giving ourselves a lot of grace to feel the feelings we're having in the moment that we're having them. And for me, burying those deep down started to make them take these physical manifestations of physical pain that were debilitating. And I realize now that debilitating pain was my blessing, my body's way of saying, whoa, you got to give yourself some grace in this grief. And you got to let yourself feel those feelings that you had to bury because you were in survival mode. And a lot of us, the pandemic put us into survival mode, and we weren't able to feel a lot of our true feelings because we were just trying to make it through, And so they're coming up now, they're bubbling to the surface now, and they're manifesting in a lot of ways that don't make a lot of sense. And I think that's where we have to give ourselves some grace that nobody has walked this path that we all have walked in the last handful of years, and we're figuring it out. And it's okay if 2 years later, you're coming to terms with a lot of the trauma you experienced in that period of time.
Absolutely. You have this Instagram following. It's crazy. And I mean, you had a strong Instagram following before. You had a strong blog before. Ashley has a really great group called Breathe and Bloom. She is really good at fostering her community. So I want to give you props on that, first of all, from a fellow dinosaur from the archaic ages of blogging. But one thing that I am so impressed with is that you're willing to show up day in and day out on social media, even in the middle of the grief. As a fellow, I guess, social media influencer, even though I hate that word, how did you balance that when you were like, I am going through the most painful thing in my entire life right now, and yet Stevie's news has gone viral, and all of a sudden your Instagram's like going nuts? Like, did you have to shut it off for a while? Like, what did that look like from both sides, personal, business, mom, all of it?
You know what? That's a great question. I actually like to talk. I haven't talked about this publicly either, but I have spoken about this with friends who have asked the same question of, are you juggling that part of this okay? Are you juggling the fact that the news is talking about Stevie, and there are, children with cancer and children passing away and parents losing children all the time, and yet somehow something about, Stevie's story was resonating and connecting with a lot of people right in the midst of while we were navigating it and processing it ourselves.
Right.
And I remember a lot of my friends being concerned that that was going to be too much. And that would make sense. And I would be equally concerned. And it was the strangest, most honestly miraculous phenomenon, because while it unearthed a lot of, we know those online trolls and the negative Nellies and all of that exists out there. And, that's unavoidable in any situation these days. But it was such a blessing to us. And I can look back and I can see all the ways in which we were, as a family and myself, were prepared for that to happen in different ways, that we had different things that I had previously vulnerably shared on social media. I talk about a disorder that I have, an anxiety disorder, an OCD disorder, and it's called trichotillomania, where I pull out my own hair. And that was something that I had shared before. It was incredibly vulnerable to me. And some of the people I was closest with in my life didn't know. And I shared it online before telling some of my dearest friends.
And they're like, whoa, what?
Yeah, exactly. So there were a lot of ways that I had opened up pretty vulnerably. And there were a lot of personal growth that I went through in my 20s by being bullied online that I didn't handle as well. But I learned and I grew through that. So by the time that we reached this point where Stevie's story started to go viral, I had gained a lot of clarity and perspective about what mattered. And what mattered in that moment was my family and my daughter. And all of the stuff that could have been overwhelming and everyone's opinions that could have really impacted, it just didn't even matter. And I had just a lot of clarity about what mattered and who mattered in that moment. So I was able to really take the part that could have been overwhelming and could have suffocated us and compartmentalize that and just put that over here and not make that part of my business or part of my story. And then really call upon the blessings of this community of strangers who rallied around us and carried us and supported us and prayed for us. And we could physically feel it. We were all isolated.
So cool.
As a world, we were isolated. And I could say that the pandemic, in so many ways, that was a traumatic experience in and of itself. But the pandemic added an entire different confusing layer that nobody could tell us how to navigate. But at the very same time, the pandemic created this community who had nothing else to do but pour their love and support into our family and take thousands and thousands of people that were feeling pretty isolated and helpless at this time and give them something to find hope and light in. And they really bore those burdens with us. And that was what I think kept us through it and continues to be something that, we hold on to today.
That is so cool. And I got chills as you were talking. And I definitely was one of those people that was following along with your story and crying and praying with you and all the things. And I actually just read this quote. It was earlier this week, I think. I'm like, I have the book over here. I should probably pull it out. But it talks about how we, as even like believers, like Christ didn't call us to live a life of isolation. And like, you can't essentially like successfully live a life of faith if you're in isolation, because he created community and he created the church. How cool that you got to tangibly feel that and in your darkest hour of need, but also how neat that you were actually encouraging people maybe to question fate and heaven and hell and what all is real. What did that look like for you from a faith perspective for you and your husband, your boys, as you were thinking about what happens next for Stevie, you know?
That this is such a tricky part of our story, and yet it's not. It's so simple, and it's the truest thing that I feel and I know in my heart. But what's tricky for me is exactly what I say to you when I feel like grief is the thing that has the power to connect us the most. But I also have learned from personal experience that everyone's experience with grief is very different.
Yeah.
No two experiences with grief are alike. And we all, that one day at a time philosophy that a lot of us are living by, we each who are living in grief are getting to that next day in very different ways. And we have different ways of being carried there. And my way of being carried there is my faith. And for many others, it's not. And I have to respect that. And I do respect that. And so I always, I share what my own personal experience is. And I always say like, and this is how I'm being carried, because there are many that I respect and I admire who are navigating this exact same experience as me, other mothers out there, and their experience has made them feel like perhaps there isn't a higher power, which breaks my heart in my own personal journey. But I also have to respect that they've found a different way to get to the next day. But for me, without a doubt, when I first shared that Stevie was sick, we didn't have full details yet. And I was asking for prayers because we knew there was a mass in her brain, but we hadn't been told if it was operable yet or if it was treatable. And so we needed prayers. And then we were told the news. And I remember, in addition to having to process that myself and navigate it myself, I remember being incredibly worried for all the people who cared about her family, her friends, our loved ones, but also now this growing community that legitimately cared. And I remember thinking, I have to deliver this news to them. And my faith has never felt stronger. And I remember feeling a huge pressure that I didn't want this to diminish anybody's faith or belief, that I was not delivering the news that anyone wanted to hear. And so I remember saying that I believe in miracles and that I'm so grateful to everyone who prayed for a miracle for Stevie, and that I still believe that we're receiving miracles, just we don't always receive the miracles in the way that we pray for them. And that for us, Stevie was a miracle. Her life was a miracle. Her sickness was a miracle. Her passing was a miracle, because so many people were able to be changed by her story. And so many people were able to find light from her story of darkness and, recommitted to the Lord and found their faith again, and were willing to see that I don't believe he sent us here. What would be the point if he sent us here to not experience trials? And that's where we learn and grow the most. And that I look in many ways as, our Heavenly Father sacrificing his son for us. And no, I am not, him, and Stevie is not Christ, but we are asked to come here and to live in his image. And I do believe that the loss of Stevie was a sacrifice that she even made willingly, and that it's in some part that was part of her journey, and her sacrifice was meant to have a greater purpose. And I have to believe that. I have to believe that.
Amen.
That is how I keep her legacy alive. That is how I find purpose in it. That is how I honor the life, the 3 years that she had. I am going to honor by continuing to find purpose in that life, as well as finding purpose in her passing. And because that's how big we love her. And if I can't find purpose in that, then it feels like a dishonor to her.
Hi, friend. Are you enjoying this episode? Hit that plus sign in the top right of your Apple Podcast app, or the follow button in your Spotify app, or wherever you're listening. That way you automatically get each new episode without having to search for it. You're welcome.
Yes. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, but it's also somewhat related. I'm curious because I know there's tons of mamas that are listening to this that also, might have a child dealing with anxiety or with depression, or, has lost a close family member, just lots of different things. Or even like you were saying, it doesn't have to be actually someone passing. Like, what is it, Wesley, you said, that was diagnosed with autism? Is that right? Okay. Like, how do you guys as a family rally around each other, support each other when hard things come? Like, you guys have walked through a lot of grief. And I know our family is about to walk through more grief with family members passing. I would just love to hear your advice, mom to mom, of like, what has worked well for you with talking with your kids about grief and hard things?
This has been one of the hardest parts because therapy was something that we were luckily very well versed with in our home. Number one, I have been in and out of therapy my whole life, and I like to speak to that very openly in our home because I don't want there to be a stigma around that. And I want my kids to feel like that's not something they have to hide, that we speak about our therapists, we speak about our sessions, we speak about our emotional health quite frequently. And it's funny because I was also given two boys who, regardless of how open we are with our emotions in our house, I was given two boys that don't want to talk about things.
Right.
Don't want to express their feelings. And I keep thinking, gosh, what if we weren't so open in our house about our emotions or our feelings, or so open to therapy? Like, how closed off would they be? Because it's very natural for them. And they don't come to me and say, I miss Stevie today, or I want to talk to Stevie. Things that I actually experience more with my friends' children. They will come to me and say, I miss Stevie today, or I'm having a tough day. And, can we talk about her? Or I had a bad dream about her last night, or I had a good dream about her. And I remember that being really confusing and really honestly hard for me as a parent for a little bit, that, her brothers, we talk about her all the time, but as far as the hard parts go, or when they're having tough days, they didn't want to talk about it. And so what my husband and I had to do is we really have to model what that looks like for them. And so we talk about her all the time. We also express grief openly in front of them to a healthy extent. We let them see us missing her. We let them see us cry. When they ask us what's wrong, we're honest with them. But we also are trying to teach them ways to grieve in a healthy way, that it is healthy to cry, that it is healthy to have bad days, that it's perfectly normal. And then we talk about it. And sometimes, that will look like my husband having a little afternoon breakdown and my boy saying, what's wrong with dad? And me saying, you know what? It's really missing Stevie today. Or today was the day that this happened with Stevie, or this memory popped up on our phone, or it's just a bad day. And talking through that with them. But also, when it comes to kids, a lot of what they're truly feeling on the inside manifests in other behaviors. And that's what I notice with my boys, whether it's trouble at school, whether it's frustration with homework, whether it's getting in arguments with each other, whether it's being silent and shutting down, whether it's being a poor sport in a basketball tournament that they have that weekend.
Sure.
We were able to identify how they were doing with their grief, with how they were showing up in other areas of their life. And so for my youngest, it looked like a lot of poor sportsmanship in the sports that he was playing, that he would show up and he's obsessed with sports and he's a great athlete. And so he would leave it all on the court and not in ways that were appropriate.
Sure.
Recognizing, oh, here's what's really happening. Or, my oldest son, it was manifesting as, behaviors in the classroom. And it was us able to say, he's not frustrated with his actual schoolwork. He's feeling a lot of emotions and this is showing up in other ways. But we had to recognize that so that we could then sit down with them and try, to talk about those bigger emotions.
That's such good advice. And everybody knows, your kid better than anybody else. So exactly. I think that so often as moms, we don't give ourselves enough credit. So also like knowing what Ashley's saying and knowing what your therapist is saying or whatever else, but also lean into your knowledge of your kid because they're your kid and you have the best gut feeling about what's going on with them. And then I did want to ask you too, Ashley, you mentioned obviously that you feel you're dealing with PTSD right now. How would you say that people can best support you in that and or pray for you in that? Because I feel certain there's military families listening that have, people going through PTSD. And so I think that'd be refreshing to have that insight. Wow. Thank you so much to Ashley for sharing her story. Please make sure you join us next Tuesday for the rest of her story and to hear Ashley's thoughts on trauma, specifically PTSD, and the power of having a community that supports you. It really is so wild how grief affects so much more than just your emotional health, it's mental health, it's sometimes physical and spiritual. Everyone's grief plays out differently. And it's just so fascinating how our bodies, our spirits, our minds take all that in. If you want, hit that plus sign or follow button wherever you listen to podcasts, and you'll automatically get part 2 right there for you next week. Can't wait for y'all to hear the rest.
Hey, if you're loving the show, click that follow button on your podcast app. This will ensure you won't miss a single episode. I'll see you next time.